Welcome to the Capital Light Assembly podcast, brought to you by Edison Manufacturing and Engineering. Edison is your capital light assembly partner focused on assembly of complex mobility and energy products that are not well suited for highly automated production. Joined again today by Tracey Fletcher. So Tracey's our Chief People Officer for Wallbank Industrial, which includes Edison as well as our sister company, PJ Wallbank Springs. Tracey, thanks for coming back on the podcast here.
Hey, Brandon, it's good to be back. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. The last discussion we had was around the importance of culture, what that means, how we think about that, and a piece of that is core values. And we talked about the importance that we place on core values, and also just the idea and how critical it is to define kind of what's important to an organization. And now the discussion goes a layer deeper today, or that's at least the goal here, to get into, okay, how do you actually operationalize these core values? How do you take it from an academic exercise of defining, okay, what in theory are the things that matter to us, to
hmm
how are we actually putting values in practice in the way that we're impacting our people and the way we're doing business and such. So with that being said, would you mind setting the stage a bit and explaining, so what do you, when you think of operationalizing core values, what do you think about? And then also, why is I think you previously mentioned that this is, like 80 whatever percentage of organizations fail to take this step, and why is this such a
Yeah.
challenge to operationalize core values?
Yeah, I think it's a really good place to start, right? So what do we mean by operationalizing core values? When I think about it, Brandon, it's really about going beyond that academic or that ceremonial step of defining your core values and that art with posters on the wall or what's on your website that describes those. And it's more about getting them to work for you in the existing systems and processes that your people use every day, and doing the work then to embed your core values in those systems and processes. And you mentioned too, like, so why is this challenging? Why is that something that very few organizations really do the work to do or even aspire to do? And I think there's likely a couple things at play there. The first one is that when you think about embedding into systems and processes, generally those systems are owned by different people in the organization. So that they could be very disparate, and it's difficult to figure out how you might make that work inside an organization that's been functioning in a particular way for a particular amount of time. The other one I think is a little more tricky, and that is that it isn't always that an organization believes that your culture and your values are as important as they should be to your business success. And so you have some leaders who, and some organizations that absolutely see we should have values and the people side is important, but they're not thinking about integrating those things. They should be, because there's a lot of research out there, and even recent research from earlier this year from Leadership IQ that tells us that engagement is driven and increases when you do take the time and effort to operationalize your values. And I think we all know that engagement is really that sort of X factor when it comes to performance and the results, discretionary effort that any organization is really trying to tap into in order to achieve, positive things. And in our organization, something that really works for us is the idea that we're able to build our culture and our values really, from a starting point versus trying to make change and operationalize those within an existing system. So that's a reality and that's a positive, but it doesn't mean that it's not possible. So when I think about our sister company, you mentioned PJ Wallbank Springs, that's a 40-year-old manufacturing organization and environment. But with the right support of leadership, we absolutely can transform and operationalize core values, and that's work that we've done.
Gotcha. Yeah, that all makes sense. And it sounds like the first thing is you actually have to believe that it's an activity that's important and worth doing, right?
Right.
And so whether that's like Edison as a growing company who has the opportunity to build a culture from the ground up, or an established organization like PJ Wallbank Springs, it's either way, like it requires a commitment and a belief that yes, this is important. And then you need to navigate all the hurdles of the challenges that come into actually operation or executing on this. So how do you think about kind of the steps or the key categories, the key areas where we look to incorporate these core values into our everyday business?
Yeah. So there's probably a number of areas that we could explore that you could tap into, and maybe they're slightly different depending on the organization. But there's four that are really important to us, and maybe four examples worth sharing. The first would be recruitment. So thinking about how we select people to join us and making sure that our values are embedded in that process. I'd also mention performance management. So that's the process by which we use to evaluate, coach, and develop our team members. A third would probably be decision making, and that's how we want people to think about important decisions that are made and how core values come into play with those. And then for the fourth one, I would say recognition is something that's really key as well. How we recognize people not just for what they do in order to deliver results, but for the way in which they do it.
Got it. Yeah, and it'd be great if we could even dig a layer deeper here. So
Hmm.
it might be interesting to take a given corporate, right? So we have defined core values here at Edison, maybe or at Wallbank Industrial, so Edison as well as our sister
Hmm.
company BJ, and maybe pick one your favorite or just whatever comes to mind. Maybe let's talk through in a bit more detail what that might look like for each of these different key practices for how you can put this a core back practice into place.
Yeah, absolutely. So of our core values, I think one that's very widely recognized might be treat others as you like to be treated. And so maybe that's a good one to use for an example here because it's very relatable for anyone who's listening.
Yeah, perfect.
Um, Make sense? So we could start with recruitment, and how we think about embedding the core value of treat others as you'd want to be treated in a recruitment process. And there's a couple things that come to mind. The first is the structure, right? So when we think about being intentional about what we want to get from a conversation with a candidate, we're not just looking for positional knowledge, but we also want to look for evidence of how they've achieved results that align with this value. So it's being intentional around the questions that you ask. And when we think about it from a behavioral based interview question, we would want to make sure that we're asking a candidate more than just what they do, but how they do it, and we're digging deeper to get at that. So that to me often requires the ability to you may ask one question, but then you want to go much deeper to listen to what are all of the interactions that they might have around the answer that they're giving. And so, just even structuring an interview with that in mind is important. But probably something that's maybe a little lesser thought of would be paying attention to the subtle or the observational things that you can do in an interview practice. So, for example, if we were to have someone travel in for an interview and they are interacting with people beyond just that interview team. So maybe they're interacting with someone else in the business to book their travel, or they're in the lobby for a few minutes before they come into the building. What we would want to make sure we did was check in with the individuals that they interacted with and see, how did that go? What was that experience like? And how did they behave during the different interactions that you had? And so it's things like were they polite? Were they respectful? Were they understanding? Or were they, frustrated or short with people? And that's not the entire way in which we make a decision for sure. It's a data point, but I think organizations who operationalize core values during the interview process, it's not just about what happens in the room and those behavioral based questions, but also like making sure that you're tuned into who people are and the different ways that they might reveal that through those other kinds of interactions.
Yeah, and it seems like to some extent you're looking to gather both quantity and quality of data, right? So like there's a lot of ways to do in the room recruit or interviewing incorrectly, right? And just let your own biases take you or let someone kind of or have an interaction that doesn't allow you to really get deep into the things that you want to. So it seems like there's a lot of intentionality there and making sure that the structure and the way in which we're conducting those discussions are being done. But then also, as you mentioned, kind of alongside that, gathering evidence from other places, a bunch of different data points that
That's
allow
right.
us to see a bigger picture.
Yeah, that's right. And I would say too that, if someone shows up in a way that's outside of our core values, that's okay. All it tells us is it doesn't mean that, they're not a good person or they have values that aren't great. What it tells us is that this isn't a place that they're going to be happy at or that they're going to succeed at. It's the wrong kind of culture for them. So it's as important to us, I think, as it would be to the candidate's ultimate experience in joining our organization. So
Yeah,
I'd like to think about it from that perspective too.
cool. Yeah, and then maybe transitioning to the next step of, okay, once we do have a team in place, what does it look like from performance management, how we're incorporating values or this value of treat others as you'd like to be treated?
Yeah. So how does it show up in a performance review process? So I think, what's important first and foremost is again to make sure that when you're thinking about evaluating what a high performer looks like, that we take the time to make sure that it's a component of the process itself. So again, many organizations will recognize people for the results that they achieve, and it doesn't matter how they got that done. That is not the case in our organization. So we're looking for the definition of high performance being someone who can achieve the results, the goals, the very ambitious goals that we have, but not in a way that leaves people behind. So that's a key part of our practice. We would have both a component of the results that you get, and then also the core values and behaviors that go beyond that or behind that. And I think the difficult work in this is making sure that you define what those behaviors are and are specific about what that looks like. So, when I think about treat others as you'd like to be treated, um, and it being part of a performance appraisal process, maybe something we don't think about that often is as a leader, treat others as you'd like to be treated. One of the ways that that behavior shows up is it is in how you develop your team. It's in how you challenge your team to grow because we know that you're not going to engage your team if you are the kind of leader who does all the work for them, that doesn't give them the opportunity to grow or to stretch and to be challenged. So that's maybe an example of how that looks from the leadership perspective, but embedded in a performance appraisal here.
And it seems maybe obvious on the surface, but I think there's more nuance to this. I mean, like a perform. It can't just be, hey, do I like this person whose performance? Because like you could come to that conclusion of, yeah, this person treats people well. They're good to work
Mhm.
with. They're good to work, and that's certainly a piece of it. But it sounds like as you're talking about that, it goes deeper than that of not just yes, that's the minimum viable, like check the box table
Yeah.
stakes is yes, this is a good person to be around and a good human being that we want as part of the team. But there's more to it than that.
Yeah. And good organizations do that work to define those nuances and to make sure that that's known in terms of the definition or how you operationalize that value.
And how does then recognition potentially go along with this?
Yeah. Yeah. Recognition is one I love to talk about. So recognition is again, what you choose to celebrate and how. And so when I think about recognition and the kinds of things that we do, there's a few things that are maybe important to mention. One of them would be looking at your existing meeting structure and making sure that you take time to tell the stories of how your values are being lived. So, I imagine you'd hear pushback, right? Where you say, okay, add an agenda item for recognition into this meeting. Well, I don't think that that's necessary. You can repurpose time that you already have, but make sure that as a leader, you're being intentional about being aware of what those values look like and seeing them and making note of where you're seeing them happen. Because when we really see individuals internalizing core values, it's through the stories that they hear. It's through someone sharing, oh, here's an example of how I saw treating others as you would like to be treated happen this week. And this was really cool. And it's those stories that then allow you to say, okay, I get it. I understand what it means to be successful, to live this value here. And meeting structure is a great way to do that.
Cool. And then maybe adjacent to that, so this idea of decision making, I'm excited to hear kind of how you think about this and what this might look like in practice.
Yeah, decision making is probably the one you'd think about least when you consider like an area where it would be important to operationalize a core value. But I think it can be really powerful. So I learned this a long time ago. I had a boss and mentor who told me, he said, Tracy, when you are faced with a difficult decision as a leader here, I want you to think about our core values and use those core values to help you get unstuck and to make that difficult decision. And when you do that, it's almost impossible to make the wrong call. That's what the values can do. And I remember feeling a little skeptical about that at first, but when I put it into practice for myself, he was right. It hasn't failed me, time over time. And when I think about that from the example of treat others as you want to be treated, yeah, there's a lot of ways where that can be the winning factor in a decision that we have to make. So, even think about like something really simple. We're from a facilities perspective, we're deciding between two companies that can do landscaping for us, and the services are the same, the quote is the same. So how do we make the decision? But maybe we know that one organization we've seen or we've observed that they treat their people better than the other. Well, that's aligned with who we are. That's aligned with how we want to show up. That's aligned with the community that we want to have. And so the core values and that very simple example become the way in which we make that decision.
And it seems like there's layers here too of, I mean, so treat others that like to be treated. Decision, I mean, we're choosing, say, a contractor or someone to work with for some facilities. Like, I'd imagine, I mean, there's interactions internally with the way in which we are making or communicating around this decision. There's external communication, so the way in which we are
Yeah.
showing up and presenting ourselves to these, and the way we're treating the people who are potential suppliers here and through that quoting process. But then it's more than that. It's also ideally trying to find people who to work with who share our values. Is that an accurate way to think about it?
That's right. Yeah, it's partners, it's customers, it's really anyone that we want to come in contact with. It might be, individuals in the community who we're involved with, and do our values align? Are we trying to achieve the same things? And just always having that in mind. Are we acting inside of our values or outside of our values? Absolutely.
And I mean that you mentioned or the kind of values. You didn't necessarily say it like this, but kind of being a north star for decision making. And as we're thinking, this has been helpful, at least speaking anecdotally, as we one of the benefits of being a growing company, we get the chance
Mhm.
to define the way we do business, the processes, the systems, the way in which we're interacting internally and externally, customer interaction, the user experience, all these types of things, and continually going back to the question, well, wait, who do we actually want to be as an
Yeah.
organization, and what drives us, and how can we then use that as the north star for us to decide, well, yeah, what should this interactive look like as we're giving program updates to the customer? We should,
Yeah.
because there's often a wide solution set, and there's a bunch of companies who have been had success in different ways, but we get the opportunity to define, no, this is the way we want to do business.
That's absolutely right. And using our values as a framework for that, again, we're not going to go wrong. And
Yeah.
it can simplify something that could be pretty complex in other situations. And you're absolutely right, Brandon. The opportunity to build that at the point in which we are at Edison is it's very unique and I think a differentiator for us.
Cool. So if I can step back and try to summarize kind of the first discussion we had, and then now this one. So the first one is, yeah, culture is important, defining where you want to go and being intentional about it and documenting, hey, this is what we're trying to do. These are the core values, critical. And then the next step of let's actually try to put that into practice and operationalize it. And you mentioned, I guess you said, yeah, there's lots of places where it shows up, but for the main ones are recruitment, performance management, decision making, and recognition. Yeah, it seems like a nice. So I'm excited. I'm sure we'll continue this discussion. There's a lot to go from here, but this is really helpful. And anything you want to add or anything we missed here?
No, I think that's a really good summary. And you know, when you think about if culture is how we want to do things around here, then it's our values that we really have to measure ourselves by and do the hard work of embedding those in our existing systems and processes and those that we continue to build in the future. So it's absolutely above what the norm or the baseline that organizations do, but I think it makes us stronger and better because of it.
Great. Well, Tracy, thanks again. Really appreciate your time and your insights here.
You bet, Brandon. Always happy to do it.
Thanks.